Before we begin, take a deep breath. If you are here right now, this is not a coincidence. Gemini is often seen as the sign of the mind, curious, expressive, fast-thinking, always moving between ideas, conversations, and possibilities. But what many people don't talk about is the emotional journey behind that restless energy. Beneath the words, the laughter, and the adaptability, there is a sensitive inner world searching for balance, meaning, and emotional clarity. If you are a Gemini, you have probably felt this contradiction before. One moment you feel inspired and connected, and the next you feel emotionally distant or overwhelmed by your own thoughts. This is not confusion. This is evolution. And today we are going to talk about what emotional growth really looks like for Gemini. This video reveals 5 powerful lessons for Gemini's emotional evolution. Lessons that don't ask you to change who you are, but to understand yourself more deeply. These lessons speak directly to the Gemini mind, helping you recognize patterns, release emotional noise, and transform duality into wisdom. As an air sign, Gemini processes emotions through thoughts, communication, and perception. But when emotions remain unexpressed or misunderstood, they turn into inner tension. Emotional evolution begins when you stop running from what you feel and start listening to what those feelings are trying to teach you. Each lesson in this video is a mirror, reflecting parts of your personality that are ready to mature, expand, and align. You will discover how Gemini energy can move from emotional fragmentation to emotional clarity, from scattered attention to conscious awareness. And yes, the 5th lesson carries a message that often arrives when Gemini is ready to shift on a deeper level. It may challenge the way you see your emotions, your relationships, or even your purpose. Many Geminis do not expect this lesson, but once it is understood, it changes everything. This is not about labeling Gemini traits as strengths or weaknesses. It is about understanding how your emotional nature evolves when your mind and heart learn to work together. Gemini duality is not a flaw. It is a bridge between perspectives, experiences, and truths. So stay with me. Listen with openness. Let each lesson unfold naturally. Because emotional evolution does not happen all at once. It happens the moment awareness begins. And by the end of this video, you may realize that the message you have been searching for was already within you. Gemini, the sign of the fast mind, communication, and infinite curiosity. Always remembered for intelligence, versatility, and the ability to adapt to any environment. But behind this mental agility lies something rarely discussed, a silent inner conflict, an emotional journey that few truly understand. Despite the apparent lightness, Gemini carries deep emotional challenges. Invisible lessons that shape how Gemini loves, expresses themselves, and protects themselves from the world. Gemini thinks fast, speaks fast, feels fast, but does not always know how to process what they feel. Often, Gemini rationalizes emotions to avoid drowning in them. Smiles, changes the subject, moves forward. But what is left unsaid accumulates. And it is within this inner silence that true emotional evolution begins. Because growth for Gemini is not about learning more, it is about feeling with presence. Do you want to understand the 5 most powerful lessons for Gemini's emotional evolution? Stay until the end, because lesson number 5 will surprise you. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the notification bell. Your energy strengthens this space and connects us even more deeply to the universe of the zodiac signs. The lesson of feeling without rationalizing everything. For Gemini, feeling and thinking happen almost at the same time. The mind activates before the heart can even finish a sentence. When an emotion arises, Gemini tries to understand it, explain it, organize it, name it, create logic around it. Gemini asks, why? What does this mean? How do I fix this? This mechanism is not born from coldness, but from a need for control. Thinking is how Gemini avoids getting lost inside what they feel. The problem begins when every emotion becomes a mental puzzle. Feelings that cannot be resolved through logic end up being archived, postponed, or disguised with words. Gemini moves on, changes the subject, fills the mind with new stimuli, believing the emotion has already been overcome. But the body and the heart do not forget. What is not fully felt returns as anxiety, restlessness, insomnia, or a constant sense of emptiness that is difficult to explain. This lesson asks something challenging of Gemini: to stop thinking for a few moments and simply feel. Without translating emotion into concepts, without searching for justifications, without trying to be rational all the time. To feel anger without guilt. To feel sadness without turning it into a joke. To feel fear without needing to explain it. When Gemini allows this inner space, something profound happens. Emotion stops being a threat and becomes information. Feeling does not mean losing control. On the contrary, when Gemini allows themselves to move through an emotion, it passes more quickly and with less weight. Excessive rationalization creates resistance. Conscious feeling creates release. Emotional evolution begins when the mind learns to serve the heart, instead of silencing it. Another essential point of this lesson is understanding that not every emotion needs to be shared immediately or turned into dialogue. Gemini has a natural impulse to talk, explain, communicate. But some emotions ask for silence, presence, and inner listening. Learning to stay with what is felt, without external distractions, strengthens the connection to one's emotional truth. When Gemini stops rationalizing everything, they discover something liberating. Feeling does not make them weak, confused, or unstable. Feeling makes them whole. Gemini's brilliant mind does not lose strength when the heart is heard. It gains depth. And it is in this balance between thought and emotion that true emotional maturity begins to form. This lesson does not ask Gemini to abandon intelligence, but to learn when to pause it. Because some answers do not come from fast thinking, but from the silence that allows emotion to fulfill its role. And when this happens, Gemini stops running from themselves, and finally begins to find themselves. The lesson of staying instead of escaping. For Gemini, movement is natural. Changing environments, conversations, interests, or directions is not instability, it is emotional survival. When something becomes too intense, confusing, or emotionally demanding, Gemini feels an almost automatic impulse to pull away. Not because they do not care, but because they fear being trapped in an emotional state they do not know how to sustain. Escaping often feels safer than staying. This lesson arises when Gemini realizes that not every feeling of restlessness is a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes, discomfort is simply the beginning of growth. Deep emotions ask for time, presence, and continuity. Staying does not mean self-erasure, sacrifice, or loss of freedom. It means giving the experience a chance to fully reveal itself, without interrupting it halfway. Gemini often leaves situations at the exact moment they begin to touch sensitive inner parts. A relationship when it starts to require depth. A conversation when it approaches vulnerability. A project when initial excitement gives way to consistency. In these moments, the mind creates justifications. It's no longer interesting. It doesn't make sense anymore. This isn't for me. But behind these narratives, there is often simply a fear of feeling too much or not knowing how to handle what arises. Staying is an act of emotional courage for Gemini. It is choosing to remain even when the mind demands distraction. It is taking a deep breath when the urge to disappear arises. It is allowing silence, conflict, or uncertainty to exist without an immediate need to escape. When Gemini learns to stay, they discover that intensity does not destroy them, it strengthens them. This lesson also teaches that escaping does not eliminate emotion, it only postpones it. What is not lived in one place reappears in another. The pattern repeats with new people, new stories, and new settings. Emotional evolution happens when Gemini recognizes this cycle and decides to break it, staying consciously where they once escaped. Staying does not mean being trapped in suffering, but moving through it with presence. When Gemini holds an emotion until the end, something resolves internally. Restlessness softens, the mind slows down, and a sense of emotional grounding emerges, something that once felt impossible. By learning to stay, Gemini builds trust in themselves. Trust that they can feel, handle, process, and grow without needing to run. This lesson transforms restlessness into inner stability. And paradoxically, it is by learning to stay that Gemini discovers a deeper freedom. The freedom of no longer needing to escape from themselves. The lesson of aligning words and emotions. Gemini masters the art of communication. They know how to choose words, adapt their speech, read the room, and adjust their tone to fit the situation. Speaking comes naturally, almost instinctively. But precisely because of this ability, Gemini often uses words as an emotional shield. They say what sounds intelligent, light, or socially appropriate, and keep what they truly feel inside. Not out of dishonesty but out of self-protection. This lesson emerges when Gemini realizes that speaking is not the same as expressing. It is possible to say a lot and still hide what matters most. Deep emotions, when they find no voice, begin to manifest in other ways. Irony, sudden silence, emotional distance, changes in behavior. Words that are misaligned with emotion create inner confusion and noise in relationships. Gemini learns early on that communicating well is a form of control. By over-explaining, rationalizing feelings, or turning everything into casual conversation, vulnerability is avoided. But emotional evolution asks for the opposite. Saying what is felt without mental excess, without long speeches, without defensive justifications. Sometimes a simple, honest sentence carries more truth than a perfect argument. Aligning words and emotions requires courage. It means admitting sadness when lightness is expected. Confessing insecurity when confidence is expected. Expressing need when independence feels required. For Gemini, this is uncomfortable because it breaks the image of constant ease and adaptability. But it is within this discomfort that emotional authenticity is born. Another aspect of this lesson is learning not to speak impulsively. Gemini feels, thinks, and speaks almost simultaneously. When there is no internal alignment, the emotion shifts, but the words have already been spoken. Then come regret, confusion, and the feeling of having betrayed oneself. Emotional maturity arises when Gemini learns to pause before speaking, check in with what is truly being felt, and only then express it. When words and emotions move together, relationships become clearer and safer. Others no longer have to guess what Gemini feels, and Gemini no longer carries the burden of being misunderstood. Communication stops being a strategy and becomes a true bridge between the inner world and the outer world. This lesson teaches that it is not necessary to explain everything, only to be truthful. Aligning words and emotions does not limit Gemini, it liberates them. Their communication remains brilliant, but now it carries depth, presence, and emotional truth. And it is at this point that Gemini stops merely talking about life, and begins to live it with authenticity. The lesson of integrating duality. Gemini's duality is one of the most misunderstood traits in the zodiac. Often mistaken for indecision or instability, it is actually the ability to perceive multiple perspectives at the same time. Gemini does not live divided because they do not know who they are. They live expanded, feeling, thinking, and reacting from different layers of their own consciousness. The emotional challenge arises when these inner parts enter into conflict instead of dialogue. From an early age, Gemini learns to move between opposites. Reason and emotion, presence and distance, enthusiasm and withdrawal. Instead of accepting this multiplicity as a natural part of who they are, Gemini often tries to choose one side to please others, adapt, or avoid judgment. This constant effort to be just one thing generates inner tension, guilt, and a sense of incoherence. The lesson of integrating duality begins when Gemini understands that they do not need to fragment themselves in order to be accepted. Integrating duality does not mean eliminating contradictions, but allowing them to coexist. Gemini can love deeply and still need space. They can commit fully and still value freedom. They can feel everything intensely and still need lightness. When one side is denied, emotional imbalance appears. When both sides are embraced, maturity emerges. This lesson demands deep self-acceptance. Gemini needs to stop explaining themselves all the time, to others and to themselves. The restless mind searches for logical coherence, but the soul does not move in straight lines. Emotions are paradoxical. Feeling two opposing things at once is not a flaw, it is human. When Gemini understands this, they stop forcing immediate decisions and begin to respect their own internal processes. Integrating duality also means learning to communicate this complexity without guilt. Instead of pulling away abruptly or changing behavior without explanation, a mature Gemini can say, "I feel two things at the same time, and I am learning how to navigate that." This honesty reduces conflict and strengthens bonds, because it transforms confusion into awareness. When duality is integrated, Gemini no longer feels internally divided. The parts that once competed begin to cooperate. The mind remains quick, but now works in favor of emotional balance instead of against it. Restlessness becomes flexibility. Change becomes choice, not escape. This lesson reveals that Gemini's true stability does not come from fixing themselves in one place, but from fully accepting who they are. By integrating their duality, Gemini becomes more whole, more conscious, and emotionally freer. Because when all parts are allowed to exist, Gemini finally finds peace within their own movement. The lesson of quieting the mind to hear the soul. For Gemini, the mind never stops. Thoughts arise in constant sequence, ideas overlap, inner dialogues happen all the time. Silence, for this sign, often feels uncomfortable, unproductive, or even threatening. The active mind is the territory where Gemini feels safe, in control, and connected to the world. But that same mind, when it never slows down, becomes constant noise that drowns out the deeper voice, the voice of the soul. This lesson arises when Gemini realizes that thinking does not solve everything. There are moments when no analysis brings clarity, no conversation brings relief, and no explanation makes sense. It is in these moments that the soul tries to speak. But while the mind is too busy, the message cannot be heard. Quieting the mind does not mean eliminating it, but creating space between thoughts so that something more subtle can emerge. Gemini often searches for answers outside, in conversations, information, stimulation, movement. Yet their greatest wisdom is born when they learn to pause. In silence, unprocessed emotions rise to the surface. Bodily sensations appear. Intuitions emerge without words. At first, this can create anxiety because there is no distraction and no escape. But little by little, Gemini realizes that silence does not empty them, it reveals them. Listening to the soul requires presence. It is not an intellectual exercise, but a sensory and intuitive one. It can happen in simple moments. Walking without headphones, observing the breath, sitting for a few minutes without external stimuli. In these moments, Gemini begins to recognize inner signals that were always there but were ignored by mental haste. This lesson also teaches that not every answer needs to be immediate. Gemini's mind wants quick solutions, clear decisions, logical conclusions. The soul works at a different rhythm. It responds with sensations, images, subtle feelings. When Gemini learns to respect this timing, they begin to make more aligned decisions, not based solely on reason but on a deep sense of inner coherence. Quieting the mind does not make Gemini less intelligent, it makes them wiser. The mind remains brilliant, but now serves as a tool, not as the absolute commander. Intuition gains space. Anxiety softens. A sense of direction arises that does not need to be explained, only felt. This is the lesson that surprises because Gemini spends a lifetime searching outside for what was always within. By listening to the soul, Gemini discovers that they do not need to run, prove, or fragment themselves. Everything they need to know emerges when the noise fades. And in this conscious silence, Gemini finds the emotional clarity that transforms their entire journey. If this message reached you, it was not by chance. The number 0303 carries the energy of conscious communication, alignment between mind and heart, and the confirmation that you are exactly where you need to be right now. If you felt that this message spoke directly to you, confirm its reception by writing 0303 in the comments. This simple gesture strengthens the connection between you, the universe, and the message that found its way to you. And if this content brought you clarity, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell to receive new messages, and share this video with someone who may also need to hear this right now. Sometimes, you are the bridge the universe uses to reach another soul. Trust it. The message has arrived. The cycle completes itself now.